For those of you who've been around since the start of my Vento Aureo episode analyses, you'll know that I struggled with copyright for the first two episodes, and specifically the first episode, which I chose not to mirror or, let's say, disfigure the footage from the episode in any unrecognizable way, at least by YouTube standards. That video got flagged to death. It got flagged twice, actually. One by Warner Brothers Japan, and why by some sinister organization who I have no idea what relation they have to Vento Aureo. But not only have they found it reasonable to copyright my video, but also they've rejected my dispute, which not even Warner Brothers Japan did. Right, so Warner Brothers Japan let go of their copyright dispute. They said, alright, you're well within your rights to do whatever you're doing, which I am. But this, I can't really remember what they're called. But they seem to be very insistent that they own any of this. And in fact, if I try to dispute it anymore, I'm pretty confident I'll get a copyright strike. And I don't want to risk that. So instead, I'll get one over them, but I will have to disfigure the footage in a manner that those of you who have seen episodes 3 and 4 will be familiar with. So it'll be a bit meta for a while in that there'll be two of me on screen for a little bit, because I am wholesale copy-pasting the video that I made, modifying it so YouTube's, copyright detection algorithm, whatever they use, doesn't pick it up. But it will mean that people in Europe will be able to watch episode 1. See, because although the second copyright strike wasn't lifted, it only really applied to European states, which also includes England for now, I suppose, even though Brexit was a thing, maybe? Anyway, so for those of you, Europeans, for those of you in Europe, this video specifically is going to be for you, so you can actually engage with episode 1. And in fact, for those of you in North America, the previous video that I had is going to be unlisted. There will be a link to it in the description, so if you want to look at the comments, then certainly you can, but this is more just for like the 2% of my viewer base that watch my videos from Europe. So you can get the entire Vento Aureo analyses, and when I get to future videos, and there's a particular idea from episode 1 that I try and recall, you won't be like lost or confused or anything like that. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this a second time if you already watched episode 1 when it was released, and if not, then I hope you actually get to enjoy the full gold experience of me ranting about Vento Aureo. It's over to me from like a month ago talking about episode 1 of JoJo no Kimio na Bouken Ogon no Kaze Gold Experience. I hope you guys enjoy. Hello everybody, welcome to another video. I'm sitting down today instead of standing up as I usually do because it is time to watch Vento Aureo Golden Wind. I've already seen this first episode, but I wanted to, well, obviously I want to rewatch it. It's JoJo, why would you not? Engage with it as often as you possibly could. But also I wanted to do kind of a, not so much a reaction video as, there'll be elements of an analysis video. So I'll go through the episode and I'll talk about things that David Production is doing as an adaptation and as, an animated product. I'm not really sure what it's going to be, but it's the general hope is I'm going to go through the episode and basically talk about these details that I think normally you wouldn't be able to pick at just because you're watching it and you don't have the time to pause and do all this stuff. So, yeah. This should be a lot of fun. Episode 1 is Crunchyroll. Yeah, I am on Crunchyroll because hello? If I just play it, what will that do? Okay, perfect. So I'll just play the episode and I'll talk about, whatever comes into my mind from an analytic perspective. And I'll try not to talk too much, although when I tried doing something similar for the previews, I ended up talking about if you string all the previews together, that's like 2 minutes of screen time. I ended up talking for 90 minutes straight about this preview. So hopefully, we have a 20-minute episode, a 23-minute episode actually, because there's no opening or ending. And hopefully I won't be talking about it when the sun rises tomorrow. So let's get into it. Immediately we get Crunchyroll's low resolution stuff. Wow, perfect. So immediately we get a bunch of stuff that is original to the anime, original anime content, which some people will call filler, but I don't think necessarily you can describe it as that. as that. Filler would mean they're doing it only to fill the time, only to pass the time because they've got a lot of screen time. But I don't think that's the case. The end of the episode is up until, Bruno and Giorno start fighting, which I think is a very, very good place to be. And I'll talk about that at a future point. So I don't think that's what they're doing, but I do think some of this footage is kind of unnecessary because a lot of these, I'm not really sure what they're trying to show other than, hey, Italy isn't exactly the most perfect place. There's a lot of corruption, there's thieves, and obviously children being sold drugs is a big part of the story. Also, it doesn't look particularly good, I think. Like, the animation, this particularly looks really, really good. But some of the other elements, I think, like the police officer, for instance, like, some of this character art isn't quite as perfect as I'd like to see it be. Like this, for instance, there's a lot that's flawed here, in my opinion, and I'm not really sure if that's a consequence of the fact that it is anime original content, or maybe it was rushed, or maybe, that's just the quality of the show that we should be expecting. Now, I don't think that's actually the case because the rest of the episode does look pretty good. Then we get this scene, which, again, like, I don't really know how I feel about this because it shows Giorno being like a pretty nice guy. And talking to these two other girls, which is alright, but I think it's trying to highlight Giorno's niceness and his general character a bit too heavily. Like, we see Giorno save the girl's wallet from being stolen, but then we learn later that he's already taken a couple of bills before he returns it. So, it's very on the nose, and I don't think that's a good place for JoJo to be. Like, it's already so exaggerated and it's already so extravagant. That's beautiful animation, by the way. It's already so, like, extravagant that making stuff obvious is, like, the least meaningful thing you can do with JoJo. So, and then, here again, with the money that he steals, he then gets the boy ice cream, and it's like, oh, he is a nice guy after all. It's a bit too simple, and I don't really like that. But that being said, it is just 2.5 minutes of a 23-minute episode, and again, you could argue that because the opening and the ending aren't there, the show is allowed to do this just for the first episode. And I'm willing to accept that argument. If we see more anime original content of this quality, then I wouldn't be happy as we go into the future episodes, because I just don't think there's enough time, even in like a 39 episode season, for them to do this kind of, relatively low quality content, I think. And you can tell me in the comments what you think about that, because some people, I can see a lot of people being like, oh, it really nails Giorno's character as little as we see of it within part 5, and they're willing to accept this. Whereas I'd argue against that. Now we get the second big anime original content, and it introduces Riki Luca, which I think is a really big waste of screen time, to be honest. Riki Luca, a really minor character that, I can see some people being like, oh yeah, Riki Luca, they really made Riki Luca a threatening character in this scene, but all it really did for me was it wasted a lot of time introducing a character so minor that I can't remember them ever being mentioned again. So, like, what's the point of making a threatening character, and what's the point in spending time making them, aggressive, and, he's got a really good voice actor as well, so, are they wasting that on him? I feel like they are. It's also, I don't know, like, this whole section has really lazy cinematography, I think. I don't know, something about these shots and the way it's edited I think is a bit rushed. And it might have just been that they were focusing on the actual content related to the manga. They really wanted to do justice to that in terms of animation, because, that stuff does look fantastic. So they couldn't focus as much as they wanted to on this anime original content, so it does look a bit worse in my opinion. Something about, this character art and the way it's layered onto the background, it just looks so stale, and it looks so, not exciting. Like, it looks bad. It looks bad. I'm not really sure what else to say from that. It's very flat, and the colors aren't that exciting. It's just not fun to look at. And, the rest of the episode does remedy that. It does look fantastic. So I'm not really sure what's going on with these anime original scenes. We're already at 4 minutes of a 24-minute episode. So, that's a sixth. A sixth of every episode is anime original content that looks as bad as this. I wouldn't be so happy about that. But I can certainly see why people are excited that a character like Luca is getting so much detail and is being made so threatening. It's also just a very boring story. Like, Luca is just bullying this one guy, and, there's no reason for us to sympathize with the guy being bullied. There's no reason for us to be particularly angry or scared particularly by Luca, so that later when we see him, it's not like, oh no, Giorno's in trouble. It's just like, okay, here's a guy who, is a bit crazy, and JoJo already has a lot of crazy people. We're used to this, essentially. There's no point hamming it up to the degree that they have. Yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself. I will say that, these close-ups look freaking fantastic, and the clouds especially. David Production has always done a really good job of replicating the way Araki does clouds, and these look fantastic. And, the light gradient of the sky, which is blue, actually, which I find interesting because it was really prominently yellow in Diamond is Unbreakable, and that was always really distracting. This shot, I think, is fantastic, but there's some other shots that struggle a lot in these early parts of the episode. So yeah, let's move on. Buongiorno. Buongiorno. Koichi looks smaller than ever there, which I think is freaking hilarious. So here they cut Koichi's little monologue that starts part 5 in the manga, actually, where he's talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he's talking about Italy being the center of the Renaissance and stuff, which I think is fair enough. It is kind of an odd monologue to start a show with, and I think with a manga you get the distinct impression that this is an authorial work. There's so much of Araki going into this that he can do whatever he wants and you can kind of forgive him. But this this is like a professional work, and I'm doing that with quotation marks. It's a professional work that viewers are putting to a certain standard, and to start that with Koichi monologuing about how it's the 21st century and I fell asleep watching a movie, is that juxtaposition, I think, is very much JoJo, but perhaps too much JoJo for it to work in an animated format. Nice detail with the Morio sticker, by the way. I think that's pretty interesting. I don't know, was that in the manga? I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was. Here we see the first of several really amazing animated moments, and it's dedicated to Giorno putting his ear in his hole. And I just quickly wanted to point out, this is one of the first shots that we've seen so far that really has that sketched on style that we saw with the promotional material, the key art and stuff. Like, it looks pretty much like this, like someone literally took a pen and just sketched on some of this. Like, look at the details around his arms and his hands. It really does look penned in, and that looks fantastic in my opinion. Compared to what we saw earlier on, this is a completely different level of quality, much higher in my opinion, and that's what I was complaining about. So hopefully you guys don't feel like I was being unjust with the earlier parts of the episode. And this just looks fantastic, oh my god. And the sound effects when it pops out, listen, listen, listen. Boom, boom, boom. Perfect. And then here you go. Oh my god, look at that. That looks so beautiful. So beautiful. A perfect way to draw attention to it. They don't make it a freeze frame. They actually give it like a lot of motion, but it's cinematographic techniques like depth of field and stuff that let you draw attention, that draws attention to the fact that there's money inside that, and so that's fantastic. Really, really fantastic. That's a pose. That's a wild pose. It's so subdued that it's almost not a pose, but it's also definitely a pose. I don't know what I'm saying. It's just odd. This I think is really weird because they show the line, but they don't really like draw attention to it. Like it's going off screen, which normally when you're making the audience pay attention to something, you put it more on screen. So that, I'm not really sure what's going on there. That did steal my attention a little bit, just how weird that was. Giorno looks so pure there. Let's talk about Giorno's voice actually. I thought it'd be a bit deeper. But he seems, overly nice. He sounds almost like Jonathan, which is a good thing considering, he is Jonathan's son in a way. And he is painted, he has been painted in this very episode as someone who's really nice, but I also thought he'd have a more sinister note to some of the stuff he says. But even when he gets quite angry and, really quite emotional when he's fighting against Bruno, he still has this, he still has a bit of a naive quality to his voice, and I'm not really sure whether I like that or not. Koichi looks fantastic here, can I just say. Brilliant shading, brilliant line art, I love it. One of my favorite moments in the manga right here. Ah, they nailed it! They nailed it! And I love the way that's edited, just how rapidly you see the car just like slide off essentially. Ciao! Ah, brilliant. Echo's music in the background, oh, brilliant. So yeah, no, like here when we actually get into the manga, You know, like this is pretty much the first chapter of the manga that we've seen so far. We really see some high quality work. You know, the editing is fantastic. Some of the shots have been really good. The character designs have been spot on. The pacing has been brilliant. The music, as it's coming in now, has been fantastic. And we saw very little of these qualities in those first few minutes, those first 4 minutes essentially. That's just more of the reason why I'm afraid of what they did here. Like, the original anime stuff is exactly the stuff that has been bad in this episode so far. So I've really been turned off by the idea that there will be a lot of anime original content in Vento Aureo, because so far the only good parts, in my opinion, have been the manga, the scenes from the manga. I freaking love this. Look at that. That's Echoes right there, but it's faded out. They do this later with Bucciarati, so and Sticky Fingers. So I'll point that out we'll talk about that more later. But I just love this little detail that they did here. Koichi's pose. This reminds me of the pose he did in the first Diamond Unbreakable opening. Has this been memed already? Please tell me this has been memed already. This little smile is a really important moment in this really early arc where Giorno runs away from Echoes and meets Leaky Eye Luca and stuff. Like, this smile, you really learn what Giorno's character is about. It's not that he's a nice guy who's willing to do evil stuff. He's just very calm in the face of trouble. This is Giorno. This is the character that we'll be following. This smile right here. Completely unfazed by the fact that he's been caught red-handed as he was trying to steal. Very brilliant moments, and I think they underplayed a little bit, sadly. Here we get another one of those really well animated parts of the episode. It starts with... Hang on. Let's get to the part where it actually starts. It starts right here, I think. Like, Koichi looks fantastic there. You can tell they put a lot of work into this. The way Koichi looks from side to side there is really expressive and really natural. So that, you know, like, that's what fantastic animation is about. Expressive but natural, and you can really believe in the weight of that character as it moves around. This looks fantastic. This, you might say, is bad animation, but I think it's really good, actually, because it doesn't need, you know, a frame by frame redraw just to show that Koichi is slowly, you know, he's really being pulled into this object here, and he's very curious about it. It's a very simple sentiment expressed in a very simple way, and it doesn't need to be redrawn every single time, because that's well, that's a waste of money, A. But it also complicates and confuses that very simple sentiment that Koichi is curious about this. And the simpler you can convey any emotion, the better that conveyance is. And this is like the simplest way you can animate, and it really gets the point across very well. And then we get the really good animation, and oh my god, they put so much work into it. Like, the way it opens its eyes, they nailed it, really nailed it. And look at that, like, they don't even take attention away from it by cutting away to Koichi. Koichi literally just pops up on screen because we want to see this. Like, this is what we're drawn by, but this is what we want to see, but this is what we need to see. That's a good way of thinking about the distinction. So, you know, this superimposition satisfies both parts of that, and so I'd say it's very, very well done. And then we get this. Oh my god. Every single part of Gold Experience's transformations in this first episode have been fantastic. We saw those 2 banknotes, you know, transforming from butterflies. We saw this last bit of the suitcase turning into a frog, and I think it looks so natural, but at the same time so uncanny and weird. Like, just that's fantastic. They've really nailed that. Look at this, like, just the way the background is overexposed, and we really see Koichi, you know, this angle especially shows Koichi as vulnerable and scared. And the frog takes up like a huge amount of space on the screen, as tiny as it is. And we really start seeing the visual strength of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure emerge here. The colors look fantastic, like oh my god, it's brilliant. And this is very part 4, like the canton, how everything's a bit diagonal. Koichi looking especially, you know, not particularly good because the shot is at a bit of a distance. Of course, the fact that the shot is at a bit of a distance is, I think, very part 4-esque. I don't know, like, something about this, I could see this happening in Duang, in Morio, in part 4, not Duang. So yeah, here we see Leaky Eye Luca's first appearance in the manga. Which, admittedly, you know, now it is like, oh, I recognize him, but what does that recognition give us? Like, are we scared of him now? We're just like, oh no, he's the guy who beat up the other guy. Okay. Like, there's nothing about the previous introduction we got that gives him a new aura that we couldn't appreciate in the manga. Like, this is exactly the same scene. We have the exact same emotions as before, in my opinion. In fact, I'd say we're a bit more like, oh, it's this guy. Do I really care about this guy? I'd actually argue that we care less about Likiai Luka now versus in the manga. Because in the manga, we see him come up against Giorno, and it's like, who is this guy? Is he a stand user? What's he gonna do? But now it's just like, oh, he beats people up with his spade. Scary. Ooh. You know? So yeah, maybe I am being a bit salty for no particular reason. I don't know. I'd love to hear you guys' comments and tell me if I'm wrong and what you guys thought of Likiai Luka's introduction, because I have issues. I have problems with this. I like how Giorno bows even though he's Italian. This looks beautiful. One of my favorite shots in this episode. Giorno looks beautiful here. Like, look at all these lines. Look at the shading. Look at the blacks. Oh, it's beautiful. Dio! Nani? And this animation. There's not much to it, but it does look fantastic. The action's really expressive, I think. Far more than many other anime. Like, they really ham up Luka. Like, he's got the speed lines and the camera's shaking and he's howling. You know, the voice actor does a fantastic job. And he's got these black lines, you know, all over his face. His face is almost entirely shaded. Of course, he's got the tear running, which makes his eyes all the more expressive. But these are very expressive eyes by themselves. They really make it bombastic, but the fact that he does it twice in the same episode, I don't know. It takes away from Luka, in my opinion. That was in the preview, and I talked for like, I don't know, 30 minutes about just the fact that his eyes like came out of the shadow and it looked beautiful, so I'll just mention that briefly. And this nice little animation here, very smooth. Reminds me of episode 1 of part 3, because they do a lot of that. And here we see Giorno's abs. Ah, brilliant touch. Because a lot of people were like, oh, you know, Giorno is so unlike the other JoJo's, in that he's very lithe. You know, he's not like super muscular like Jonathan and Jotaro was, and we see this and it's like, say that again, I dare you. Really, you don't think Giorno is muscular? So it's like they're proving all of them wrong, and they do a pretty good job of it just from how good his abs look, in my opinion. Oh, here we go. Nani? Muda? Muda! This map, I'm really excited to see how they'll update it as they go from Naples, and then from there they go to Capri to find the boss's treasure, and then they're given Trish, and they have to take Trish to Venice, right? And so, yeah, like all this stuff. There's also like Milano and Pisa, which they don't show, which aren't in part 5, so that's really interesting. Palermo. This is Sicily. This is Sicily. It's purple haze feedback? Purple haze feedback? Purple haze feedback? Ah! This Jotaro meeting I think is interesting because it's staged in Morio, so they're stating that Jotaro did return to Morio after the events of part 4, which I don't think he would do, actually. Like, I think it goes a bit against his character. And also, he's not on phone, they're actually meeting up in a cafe, which I think Jotaro would be less inclined to do, given, I don't know, I'd say his antisocial nature. Also, I think Josuke and Okuyasu would be here. Yeah, this fade is, I think, really one of the things that makes JoJo fantastic. Like the editing in this show is 10 out of 10, and it has been ever since part 4, I think. This guy looks suspiciously like Okuyasu. Dead ass. No, let's not. This moment right here, when Koichi confronts Giorno, there's one particular frame in the manga where his eyes just like open up crazy, and it's almost like Josuke's Mickey Mouse moment, His eyes just open comically wide. They actually don't do that, and I'm not sure what to think about that. They instead decide to resort to just like really smooth animation that shows his expression, you know, kind of opening in shock for a moment, and then he withdraws really quickly. So that's a really interesting choice. You know, are they going to commit to that? Will there be a less of a panel by panel feel to this particular adaptation? And like, are they going to be really, really loose with the source material? Because that was really, really loose in my opinion. If this was part 1, for example, the specific panel I'm talking about would probably be a very short frame that they like superimpose on top of this frame that you're looking at right now. Whereas instead they decided to play it like this. And that's an entirely different story that happens there. What we see there is Giorno actually being in shock and withdrawing. It's a very immediate emotional reaction that we kind of have to digest for a few seconds after that. You know, we're like, oh, he saw Koichi and now he's shocked. Okay, now what are they talking about? Whereas in the manga, it's more of a comedy moment, and the shock is played for gags almost. Like, I can't think of a person who would see Giorno's expression in the manga and not laugh. Whereas with regards to the anime, I can't think of a person who would see Giorno's reaction here and want to laugh. Does that make sense? Hopefully I haven't confused you guys instead. This. Oh my god, that was so perfect. Like, just the pause he does here and you're like, okay, what? And then, and then his face just pops up and he's like, go away. And then we see Godo Experience! Yes! Oh, and it comes out and it's brilliant and it's fantastic and it looks like just the way it comes out. I really think they put a lot of work into the stand summoning animation as opposed to like part 3, for example, where most of the time it would just kind of fade out, or part 4 for that matter, it would just kind of fade out of their body. But look at this detail, like they actually made it look ethereal and shiny and golden, and it has like its own build up to being summoned, and it's not just like it comes out and it punches. It's got like this whole swing, it's this whole arc, and that's fantastic animation. And look at just the way they've drawn the lines. Like, that's not normal animation lines. This looks like a calligraphy brush almost. Like, it looks fantastic. Like the weighted lines I'm talking about, really, really good. And then we have this brilliant animation, which 10 out of 10, really. I love that they maintained the exclamation and the question right there. That's cool detail. That's JoJo didn't do this for part 3, like all of part 3, I'm pretty sure. The only time where they did something like this was in the yes, yes, yes scene, but stuff like this, and not even in part 4, I believe. Like, they rarely did this, rarely. Unless I'm mistaken, in which case you can correct me in the comments, but this is sorely missed in my opinion. Like, instead of doing the exclamation and question marks, they instead resorted on, you know, spamming go, 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 which was entertaining but kind of repetitive, I think. And stuff like the exclamation and question mark really diversify that and really make you feel like you're watching a manga come to life, in my opinion. But again, if I'm wrong, then you can correct me. The music here is fantastic. Mudada. That's really good animation. Something about the way he just collapses into the ground, they really nailed. In fact, that entire animated section was really good. Like, just the way Koichi is superimposed on top first, and then we see him go into his pose here, and it's still, you know, like superimposed in a really weird way. But then Echoes comes in, and as he comes in, the background changes behind him. Right there, like, just the way that's staged and the way that's brought to life, it's just so beautifully edited. Like, they've really nailed the pacing in this show. Like, it's looking really good, and this Koichi looks fantastic in this. And of course the animation when he's actually punching the tree. This animation of Koichi like reeling back, even though it's very short, does look fantastic. Like, here you can see I freeze frames it, and every single part of this just looks fantastic. And then this, you know, just looks so good. And he's still moving. Like, that's not a still frame. Like, that's actually, you know, they put effort into making that feel like a big, realistic, meaty, weighty thing that happened to Koichi. And even then, you know, and Giorno correctly points out that he still isn't damaged after that, and that's really credit to how nice of a person Koichi is. So it's telling by showing, but then they tell anyway. So that's very Araki-esque. It's something that happens in JoJo all the time. So yeah, at least the anime has that part figured out. This coin thing I think is interesting. I'm not really sure what they're playing at. I can't remember any time a coin was significant in part 5, except for the bit that's coming up right now. So I don't know. Gold experience looks fantastic here. A bit effeminate. Am I the only one who thinks that? You know, obviously the ladybugs representing some tatas, if you know what I mean, but also, you know, the way the hips and the waist and the body is shaped. People have said that Gold Experience is a female because of its voice in one of the fighting games, but I don't think you can really gender stands like that, so I think that's kind of a stupid point to make to begin with. But here, I think especially, like, there's something very feminine about Gold Experience. Jotaro's office has a ton of fish. Who could have guessed? I love this moment. Do you believe in gravity? I love that Koichi gets the stand power wrong. Like, this is from the manga. Like, this is an anime original, but I just wanted to point out, like, this is such a nice little detail by Araki. Like, Koichi is obviously smart enough to try and guess what his opponent's stand powers are, but you know, he's not intelligent enough to figure out that, like, the tree was growing when you fought Giorno and you punched the tree, so, you know, maybe that's a hint. Maybe? I like how there's a distinct difference in resolution between the people here and Giorno here. Like, Giorno is obviously very well drawn, and these guys are just like, oops, I did this in MS Paint. They're really nailing, like, these character shots. Like, he looks so 3D. I don't know how to say it, but it looks so different from any anime I've seen. And, like, they're really nailing the Part 5 aesthetic. It looks fantastic. I've really no complaints about these close-ups. If they maintain this, if it's consistent for the whole anime, which I think it will be, because you can usually tell what parts of the first episode are just them, you know, trying to hook the viewer, and which parts of the first episode are actually what they're committing to as the show's aesthetic. And this, I think, is the show's aesthetic. Like, this looks so fantastic. Here we go, it's the picture! And it's in the Part 3 art style. They actually did it, the Madmen. They actually freaking... I could cry tears of joy. They set this up in Part 3. They made sure, you know, like, they made sure everyone figured out that they were JoJo fans, that this little detail from Part 5 was actually referenced in the Part 3 anime. And when they got to the Part 5 anime, they didn't say, oh, well, you know, it'll look too different. No, they actually did justice to it. The promise that they made in Part 3 actually came through in Part 5, and I think that's brilliant. Like, the fact that they didn't change the art style is, I think, what's most satisfying about this. Because that's what it is, right? Like, it's a nostalgia bomb, and here, you know, 4 years, or 3 years, depending on... Yeah, 3 years, because this was in the second part of Stardust Crusaders. 3 years after this first came out, we finally see it again, and it's just such a brilliant moment to bring up. Like, I can't keep staring at this. I'll get all emotional and I won't be able to talk properly. Dio dato! Does he have a picture of Yukako for no reason? What's going on here? I'm not really sure. Were these pictures in the manga? What's going on here? I'm a bit confused. Dio, it makes sense he has pictures of Dio when he's... Oh, this must be his mother. Yeah, okay. Right, obviously. So do you think in the next episode it's actually going to be Jotaro who's describing Giorno's situation with regards to his parents? Because in the manga it just kind of is explained via narration. So, you know, the pictures of him with black hair, the pictures of his mother and his stepfather. I don't know, like that. I think that would be interesting to see, like Jotaro actually explaining what's going on regarding Giorno Giovanna or Haruno Shobana. That would be really cool. Oh, Bruno! Did you guys see Bruno there? Oh, there he is! It's Zipper Boy! Data production is really good at this, like just hiding stuff in the corners and such. So, especially with like the early anime original stuff, I was wondering if they were going to show some of the other characters in the background, like Mista just walking around or something. I didn't see anything. Tell me if you guys saw something, because I'd love to know if they actually did. And then Bruno walks in. Powerful stand user. Bruno is actually a very powerful stand user. And it's not specifically that he has a powerful stand, but rather he knows how to use it very, very effectively. And I think that's a very significant difference when people talk about like which stand is stronger. It's like you can't divorce the stand power from the stand user, and Bruno is one of those people who is stronger because he is a great stand user. And so I intend to talk about it in my series about stand design whenever I get to that. Sadly, I'm really busy, but hopefully when I graduate university, which should be less than a year from now, I'll really be able to devote some time to that. Anyway, here the 3D is a bit weird. This lighting doesn't change even as the tram goes up, if you'll notice. Like it's just kind of baked into the 3D model of this. So yeah, that's just the kind of stuff you pick up when you are a nerd. This pisses me off. Crunchyroll already messing up translations. Elegant? Really? Sawayaka, even I know means peaceful. Roughly. I'll look like an ass if I get that wrong. But I'm pretty sure it means peaceful. And I think JoJo's Color Adventure also did translate this as peaceful. So I'm not ashamed to say that, but again I might be screwing it up entirely, and it is elegant, but it doesn't make any sense if they say elegant. Like, in any case, this is a bad translation. Like, this makes no, like, anyway. Here's another fantastic animation moment. That really reminds me of part 3, episode 1. Bruno's animation looks really smooth there. Almost seductive, but I'm not gay. Look at them hips, boy. I like how sinister Bruno's laugh was there. Bruno's voice actor is pretty fantastic. I love some of the work he does, and here as Bruno, he sounds both sinister and trustworthy. So it's like, you know, that's a difficult thing to pull off, and he really does do it very well. They're really nailing these facial expressions, and I think that's what they're going for throughout part 5. Not just like very static pose-to-pose animation, but also very fluid facial expression as well. And that's a high bar to aim for anime, because we all know that anime does not have the money to support that. So I'm excited to see if they'll continue that into the later parts, into the later episodes, and I sure hope they will. Because, you know, goodness knows the anime industry needs to better itself and better its standards. And if JoJo is the one to elevate that, then I am a happy person. But if they can't, then I'm not going to blame them, is what I'm trying to say, essentially. I've always enjoyed Giorno's answers to that. Bruno's laugh. He sounds very pleased by that. But I've always enjoyed Giorno's answer to that, because I always thought he'd be willing to use his stand to get away with stuff. But that just proves it wrong. Like, the fact he's willing to fix his problems without immediately resorting to his stand is something that characterizes him very differently from someone like Mista, let's say, who'll probably pull his gun out immediately, you know? So yeah, I've always enjoyed Giorno's answer there. Here Bruno explains his truth detection, and we'll see him use it once, obviously, but I don't think he ever uses it again, sadly. But it's worth it. It's worth it just for the one time he uses it. And here again, I managed to pause it on a frame where he's particularly expressive, so I'm just going to point that out one last time. He does look really, really, really happy, but malevolent at the same time. Like, look at those shadows in his over his forehead and the top of his eyes. Like, he really looks evil, and you look into his eyes, and just the way the inner part of it is glowing. They really nailed like how he's a really charismatic mafia member. Jonah looks terrified there. I don't think there's another anime that has ever animated so many tongues and so well. Like there's so many moments throughout all of JoJo actually, that like whoever's been drawing all these tongues has really gotten a lot of practice at animating tongues. Because there are a ton. Like, look at that transition. That's not a transition you see in a lot of anime. He starts with the shocked expression that we saw before, but instead of immediately going into his new emotion, we see like several frames, at least like 10 probably, where he resolves into this new expression, and that's the quality that I want to see more of, and is what I'm talking about when I say there's a focus on fluid facial expressions right there. That's an interesting transition, like Bruno's leg just swinging through the screen. This particular pose I think is one of my favorites in the manga, and they really didn't do it justice, but I'm not angry because it is a difficult pose to do justice, and in any case I have the manga to look at, so whatever. And also, one of the things that I really like is they animate Bruno from that pose to move closer and closer and closer to Giorno, and that's the strength of anime versus manga, and so they do it justice in the end, just not in the way that I really expected. This shot, I love this shot. It's such a weird angle, but it's unsettling at the same time. Bruno looking beautiful, as always, but especially beautiful. I love the way I love the way that was animated. So he unrolled his finger towards the camera. That was really good. That's how you avoid copyright, my dudes. No, but yeah, so this is probably where all the Fujoshi start booking their pre-orders for the Vento Aureo Blu-ray set. But this, I don't know, like this, they've really nailed this entire section where we see Bruno like getting closer and more aggressive, and those are all sexual terms obviously, but sexual predatoriness runs parallel to physical violence. So I think, the sexual undertones, the homosexual undertones obviously, but just the sexual undertones of their proximity and their eye contact and the fact they're holding hands, and the red lighting as well, which I think was a really interesting detail, is I think a direct precursor to their physical altercation that ends the episode. The saxophone singing is obviously a joke, but the fact that, this is so homosexually charged is, I think, not a joke at all. Like that's it really is building up to a fight. And you can say, oh well, they're just staring each other down, yeah, while holding hands, while putting their faces so close to each other that they could basically kiss. I don't think so. Like, look at that, like that proximity. I think it's making a very specific point. I love this little detail. Like, yes, he stands up and you think it's gonna cut, but he also like twists his body around to put his hand there. That's a part of animation that you really don't see in anime because they're trying to save as many costs as possible. But that little detail, that's the kind of stuff you didn't see in the Part 4 anime. In the first episode of the Part 4 anime even. Like just these little movements that make the characters feel weighty and makes the movement feel natural as well. And then I love the way the eye rolls around right there, and the hand especially opening. That was fantastic animation as well. Let's just take a closer look at that. Beautiful, really beautiful. This is a quality of animation that JoJo definitely hasn't ever reached. Not even in Part 3's first episode. It was never this consistent, and it was never this good looking every single time that it appeared. But also just anime in general. I think we're really, if David Production wants to hit the peak, it would be by maintaining this quality of animations for the rest of Part 5, because this is honestly a new level. Like, really fantastic animation. I could see this, like, this is really movie tier animation, and even then, anime movies, they don't have this quality of shading. They don't have these aggressive perspective shots. They don't have, you know, this depth in the character design. You know, this 3D-ness, this, how can I say it? You can see I'm drawing contours because, you know, that's kind of how I visualize it. Like, it's really, it's got volume, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Not only is it a very unique art style, but they're also putting a lot of talent into it and a lot of quality into it. They're not letting it be the limiting factor of the show, and so I really, really respect that. I love the way, like, you think this is the shot, right? Like, this is the shot, and Bruno's the center of it, but there's this little bit of window that Bruno just sneaks into, and that's just a fantastic... this is like horror, you know, like there's this little bit that you don't expect anything to happen in, and then boom, here comes a Bruno. Again, like... You think Giorno's expression is locked into this, but then as Bruno comes in, well, he blinks firstly, which is such a rarity in anime, but then you see him transition into this expression, and that's an even greater rarity in anime, in my opinion. You see him opening his eyes, and pay attention. We all know what's happening right here, right now. We all know what's gonna happen, so pay attention to Giorno's scene, because, you know, no one's gonna be surprised by the tongue action. Let's put it like that. We've already talked quite a lot about homosexuality, so that's just gonna be that's just gonna feed into that theme, I suppose. Ignore the tongue action and focus on Giorno's expression here. Just the way he shakes his head, right? Like, obviously, the vast majority of the animation is focused on Bruno's licking, which that's done frame by frame. They're not just grabbing his head with the tongue sticking out and pushing it up, which they could have done, but it wouldn't have been any more satisfying. And then look at this cheeky little head shake he does. Ah, I love it. It's brilliant. And I'll probably be like reversing and playing it over and over and editing right now, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But no, yeah. Then we get like this really satisfying bass sound that Jojo does all the time. I love how he's actually licking his lips there as well. But yeah, no, that bass sound right there, doom, as we get the zoom in, the close up to Bruno's face. I have waited a long time to hear those words finally animated. This little detail is one of the few things, but one of the many things that I really like about this scene. Like, just the way he fiddles with the pole. I really can't avoid these sexual connotations. Like, it's just baked in. He's fiddling with the pole, right? And like, it's a very innocent thing. He's not even looking at Giorno at this point. He's looking away, and it just seems like, he's not particularly angry at Giorno, but he's actually setting up a punch. And he uses the pole almost as a way for his elbow to, as a way for his fist to like snap to Giorno's face, and that's a really cool, how can I say it, choreographic elements. I'm not really sure how I can say that, but it's almost like, but just the way that Araki drew that action, right? Like, it feels really like meaty when he lands that punch. And this is gonna sound like a terrible thing, but I've always wanted to try punching someone like that. Not that I would really want to harm someone, but just to know what, like, how good it would feel if you punch someone while, having your fist kind of like pulled back by fiddling with a pole. I'll just stop talking now. But no, like right here, there's a neat little edit to this shot, right? I got this at like the perfect time. Look at Bruno's fist just coming in, and then that's a very snappy edit, and very snappy animation as well. Like, just those 2 frames to communicate that entire punch. Like, you can tell that's a big weighty punch by the speed at which it was communicated. So. And yeah, like, there's brilliant follow through as well. Like, this is fantastic animation. This is not even anime. This really is like Western animation, and it's high quality animation too. This is like Disney in the 90s level of animation, or like Tom and Jerry in the 50s. Like, there's really fluid animation, informed by the 12 principles of animation, and they're they're really doing it justice, and it's actually in a way even better because they've got these really complex character designs and they're shaded in a very complicated way that if I can go back to the punch, there you go, this is it. So this is the second frame of that animation. Like we still see there's a ton of black and it's still beautifully shaded, and look at Giorno's shoulders and clothing, like there's still a lot of detail going into the hair. It's very complicated, but they're pulling it off. They're pulling it off, and it looks fantastic. So what more can you ask from any animated show, let alone from JoJo, which is already like one of the best manga experiences you can have, I'd argue. Here's another brilliant frame of Bruno. This, I believe, is a racking shot where the focus goes from the character in the front to the character in the back. This has been more popular in anime recently because of digital allowances, permittances, let's say. But it's still quite rarely used, in my opinion. And to see, them using cinematographic techniques here again, just makes me happy. Bruno Bucciarati. I love that line. Your questioning is already turned into torture. And what we see, I love the fact that it's not like overwhelmingly censored as well. Fingers coming out of Giorno's mouth. That's I mean, it's not as bad as razors, let's say, but still, it's just. And look at this little detail that they put. They could have stopped animating Bruno right here, but instead, brilliant sound design. And look at it's just so beautiful, so beautiful. The music again, brilliant. I can put whatever I want in your mouth. I mean, it really you can't argue against the homosexual undertones. It's almost overtones at this point. You can't argue against JoJo's homosexual overtones. That looked fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Bruno looks fantastic here as well. Look at his expression. Now we see not the charismatic gangster, but instead it's a malicious, determined hitman. Like look at those eyebrows. Look at the disdain in his eyes. Fantastic. Here we see something else that I'll point out very soon, but like this mix of Sticky Fingers and Bruno. One of the few times David Production shows the stand as an extension of the body rather than as a separate body entirely. I mean, I noticed that Bruno has his hand under there, but they don't just show Bruno's hand is what I'm trying to say. Like they replace, not literally, but visually, they replace Bruno's arm with Sticky Fingers' arm instead, and that's I don't know if they've ever done that in the anime. So yeah, again, we get the same effect that we did with Echoes, and I wanted to talk about this here instead because this was in the preview, and I talked for another 30 minutes just about this, and hopefully I don't do the same. I'm not really sure what effect they're using here. I don't know if someone drew this, in which case, really props to them because it does look fantastic, but like this plasticky appearance where you can see, the background and Bucciarati, the poles and stuff are all being refracted through it. So it has this glass-like appearance, but at the same time, you can immediately tell its shape and the highlights of it. And it's obviously, CG in some way. And it almost looks inspired by the live action film, but at the same time, it fits into the aesthetic of the show. So this, I wonder how much of this they'll be doing throughout the show because it's a fantastic effect. And I don't think David Production has ever played with the notion of summoning a stand as much as they have done in the first episode. In this first episode. I mean, I was talking about that earlier when Giorno summoned Gold Experience for the first time. How, they had like these weighted lines glowing in the background. Let's see if I can find it. Crunchyroll. Buffering? Really? Really? What year am I in? So right here, I missed it by like a second. Oh, come on. There you go. So here, see here. Like with the weighted lines and how they're all glowing, and it's a very simplistic design, but it still gets the general form of Gold Experience across beautifully. This is the level that I'm talking about. Like they've never done anything like this. And again, you can correct me if I'm if I'm wrong about that, but this level of detail going into a stand summoning animation, and again here with Sticky Fingers they're doing something similar, except it's a very different aesthetic. Instead of the hand-drawn weighted lines I was talking about before with Giorno, it's this very brilliantly shaded, like look at all these highlights and look at the detail they've put into like the neck muscles and stuff, and it's obviously they're working with CG here, and that's very, very exciting. So yeah, I think this is also the first time we've seen a color swap in the episode. I can't remember any others, and it's not a very significant one. It's just a skin and lighting color swap rather than an outfit and like hair color and eye color swap. Although granted, his eye color did actually change. So yeah, that's an interesting detail, I suppose. A really easy way to antagonize Bucciarati. And interestingly, talking about antagonizing, we talked about how they tried to antagonize Ligia Luca before and make him terrifying. I think what they've done with Bruno so far does a much better job. Now, obviously, part of that is because this is from the manga, so I'll be more partial to it. It has the Araki touch, let's say, but also I just think it is better, and Ligia Luca doesn't deserve an introduction as dramatic and time consuming as he got, whereas Bucciarati definitely does, because he is one of the main characters. So yeah, I'll stop ranting about Ligia Luca, I promise. We're almost at the end anyway, so again, fantastic summoning animation, really like 10 out of 10. Look at this. Again, it's like the CG thing, but it's actually hand-drawn, but it's got brilliant lighting, but it looks fantastic. To be continued! And then we get the episode preview, which is really simple and I really like. Firstly, the flowers, they look so beautifully drawn. I mean, it's really Araki-esque, the way they've drawn the details on the flowers. This pattern actually they showed in the previews, and I talked for maybe another hour straight. Well, no, I can't have, because it was 90 minutes and I've already accounted for 60 of those. So I guess the other 30 minutes actually of what I talked about with the preview was actually this specific design. I was wondering why, we have the stickers, the zippers obviously from Sticky Fingers. And we have the flowers obviously representing Giorno, but where are the other characters' stands represented in this? I guess they're not gonna represent those stands, but it does look beautiful, so honestly, like, no complaints. And Giorno and Bruno, I think, are the only characters that really should be represented like this. Bruno because he is arguably the main character, and Giorno because he is the protagonist. And that's a very significant difference, I think. And so yeah, we're going into episode 2, which is Bucciarati or Bucciolati. Which one is more Italian, Bucciolati or Bucciarati? Yeah, if anyone knows, if anyone's Italian, I'd love to hear. Episodio 2, I love that they're doing this, Episodio. And of course, it's not just Jojo, it's Jojo! Hell yes. And the ladybug in the background, seriously, like, I'm so hyped for some of the stuff they're doing with this show. So yeah, anyway, I guess that's the end of episode 1, so I won't drag this out too much. I'll see you guys next week for episode 2. Bucciarati is coming. I thought the homosexuality was meant to stop. There are no brakes on the gay JoJo train. And I like it. Okay, so yeah, I'll see you guys next week for Episodio 2. Bucciarati ga kuru. And until then, I hope you guys have a fun time. Kuru? Is that did I read that kanji properly? Probably not, because I don't actually know Japanese. But there you go.